What happens when two rival writers who despise each other's genres are forced to swap stories? Can a cynic learn to write happily ever afters? Can a romantic discover the truth in literary fiction? Emily Henry's Beach Read doesn't just answer these questions, completely demolishes our pretensions about what makes literature worthy and rebuilds them into something far more honest and beautiful. Welcome back to Reader's Mind, where we explore the books that don't just entertain us but fundamentally change how we see the world. Beach Read is one of those rare novels that manages to be simultaneously a perfect romance, a devastating exploration of grief, and a brilliant meta-commentary on storytelling itself. When this book hit shelves in 2020, it didn't just become a bestseller, it sparked a literary revolution that's still reverberating through bookish communities everywhere. I have to admit something here. When I first picked up Beach Read, I thought I knew exactly what I was getting. The title screams light summer romance, the cover promises escapist fiction, and the premise sounds like romantic comedy gold. But Henry had something much more ambitious in mind. She used that seemingly simple setup to ask some of the most profound questions about art, authenticity, and human connection that I've encountered in contemporary fiction. This book has over 160,000 reviews on Goodreads. That's not just popularity, that's cultural impact. Henry managed to write a romance novel that takes romance seriously as literature while simultaneously deconstructing every assumption we have about genre hierarchies and artistic worth. But what makes Beach Read truly extraordinary is how it uses the framework of romantic comedy to explore some of the most difficult human experiences: the death of parents, the destruction of family myths, creative paralysis, depression, and the question of whether optimism is a choice or a privilege. This isn't just entertainment disguised as literature or literature disguised as entertainment. It's both, fully and unapologetically. Part 1. The Collapse of Everything. Emily Henry opens Beach Read with January Andrews facing what might be the most relatable writer crisis in contemporary fiction. January has built her entire career on writing romance novels with guaranteed happy endings, but her father's recent death has revealed family secrets so devastating that she can no longer believe in the possibility of lasting love. The discovery that her beloved father, the man who taught her to believe in true love and happily ever afters, was having a long-term affair has shattered not just January's faith in her family, but in the very foundation of her artistic identity. How can you write about love conquering all when the love story you used as your template turns out to be a lie? Henry doesn't treat this as a simple plot device. She understands that for writers, especially genre writers, losing faith in your subject matter isn't just creative block, it's spiritual crisis. January inherits her father's beach house in North Bear Shores, Michigan, and decides to spend the summer there trying to write her way back to believing in love. But the universe, with its typical sense of humor, has placed Augustus "Gus" Everett in the house next door. Gus is everything January professionally despises, a literary fiction writer who believes happy endings are lies we tell ourselves to avoid confronting life's essential meaninglessness. Here's where Henry's genius becomes apparent. She doesn't set up this conflict just for romantic tension, though the tension is absolutely electric. She uses January and Gus's professional rivalry to examine the artificial hierarchy between serious and popular fiction that has dominated literary culture for decades. Why is a book about suffering more realistic than a book about joy? Why is cynicism considered more intellectually honest than hope? The backstory of their college relationship adds another layer of complexity. January and Gus weren't just creative writing classmates, they were the top students in their program, constantly competing for professor attention and workshop dominance. Their romantic relationship ended badly when Gus's ambition and January's insecurity collided in the worst possible way. January's writer's block isn't just about her father's betrayal, it's about imposter syndrome, financial pressure, and the exhaustion of trying to maintain optimism in an increasingly cynical world. Henry perfectly captures that specific anxiety of being a commercial writer who constantly has to defend their work's legitimacy. Meanwhile, Gus is dealing with his own creative crisis. His last novel received critical acclaim but sold poorly, and he's struggling to write anything that feels authentic without being completely depressing. Both characters are trapped by the expectations of their chosen genres and the literary establishment's artificial boundaries. When January discovers that Gus is also dealing with writer's block, she sees an opportunity that's part revenge fantasy, part creative experiment, and part desperate attempt to save her career. She proposes their infamous challenge. Each writer will spend the summer writing in the other's genre. January will write a cynical literary novel about how love doesn't last and happy endings don't exist. Gus will write a romance novel with a guaranteed happily ever after. Part 2. The challenge and research phase. What follows is some of the most brilliant romantic comedy writing I've encountered in years, but it's comedy with a purpose. Henry uses January and Gus's research into each other's genres as an excuse to examine what stories mean to us and why we're drawn to particular kinds of narratives when we're trying to understand our own lives. Gus takes January on field trips designed to help her write pessimistic literary fiction. They visit depressing locations, interview divorced couples, and attend events that reinforce January's newfound cynicism about love and relationships. But Henry subverts these scenes beautifully. Instead of making January more cynical, spending time with Gus reminds her of everything she loved about him in college and why she believed in love in the first place. Their visit to a divorce attorney's office is simultaneously hilarious and heartbreaking. They're supposed to be gathering material for January's dark novel about failed relationships, but they end up having deep conversations about their own fears, expectations, and disappointments. Meanwhile, January tries to teach Gus about romance conventions by taking him to couples activities and romantic locations. One of my favorite scenes involves the book club discussion, where older women defend their romance reading choices with the kind of passion usually reserved for defending literary classics. Henry lets these characters articulate something profound, that stories about love, hope, and human connection aren't escapism, but preparation. They're not lies about how the world works, but visions of how it could work if we chose compassion over cynicism. The real magic happens in the quiet moments between January and Gus as they work on their respective books. January struggles to write pessimistic literary fiction because her natural instinct is to find hope in dark situations. Gus struggles to write romance because he's afraid that believing in happy endings will make him vulnerable to the kind of disappointment that has shaped his worldview. Their writing sessions become indirect conversations about their fears, dreams, and the relationship that ended so badly in college. They're not just learning each other's genres, they're learning each other's emotional languages and discovering that their apparent opposites in approach to storytelling mask fundamental similarities in what they want from life. Part 3. Deepening connections and painful truths. The middle section of Beach Read showcases Emily Henry's ability to balance romantic comedy with genuine emotional depth. As January and Gus's fake research relationship deepens into something real, Henry forces both characters to confront not just their professional differences, but their fundamental beliefs about love, trust, and vulnerability. Gus begins opening up about his family background and the experiences that shaped his cynical worldview. His father left when he was young, and his mother's subsequent relationships were disasters that taught him not to trust in lasting love. But Henry shows us that Gus's cynicism is actually a defense mechanism, not intellectual honesty. He writes about human suffering because he's afraid to hope for something better. January's backstory becomes more complex as well. Her relationship with her father wasn't just about believing in love, it was about believing in her own worth and the possibility that good things could happen to good people. His affair doesn't just destroy her faith in romance, it makes her question whether she deserves love and whether her optimistic worldview is naive rather than hopeful. Their research adventures become increasingly personal and intimate. A visit to a lighthouse becomes a conversation about dreams and disappointments. A trip to interview an elderly couple celebrating their 60th anniversary turns into a revelation about how love actually works, not as constant bliss but as choice, commitment, and work. Henry brilliantly uses these scenes to show how January and Gus's professional growth mirrors their personal growth. As January learns to write literary fiction, she discovers that acknowledging life's difficulties doesn't negate hope. It makes hope more meaningful. As Gus learns to write romance, he realizes that happy endings aren't lies, but goals worth working toward. This is where Henry's writing becomes truly exceptional. She doesn't resolve January's grief or make her father's betrayal disappear. Instead, she shows January learning to hold complexity, to maintain love for her father while acknowledging his failures, to believe in romance while accepting that relationships require work and sometimes fail. The romantic and sexual tension between January and Gus reaches a breaking point when they finally sleep together. But Henry doesn't treat this as the resolution of their relationship. It's the beginning of the really difficult work of learning to trust each other with their vulnerabilities. Part 4: Crisis, Truth, and Authentic Resolution. The final third of Beach Read is where Emily Henry proves that contemporary romance can tackle complex emotional truth without sacrificing the genre's promise of satisfying resolution. Instead of creating artificial obstacles to keep January and Gus apart, Henry explores the real challenges that face two people trying to build a relationship while dealing with grief, professional uncertainty, and deeply rooted emotional fears. The revelation about January's father's affair becomes more complicated when she learns that her father's relationship with his lover wasn't just selfish betrayal. It was also genuine love that developed over many years of marriage problems that January never knew about. This doesn't excuse his choices, but it forces January to grapple with the complexity of adult relationships. Henry's handling of this revelation is masterful because she doesn't ask January to forgive her father or accept his affair as justified. Instead, she shows January learning to live with ambiguity and complexity while still maintaining her belief in love's possibility. Meanwhile, Gus receives an offer from his editor to write another literary novel in his established style, dark, cynical, critically acclaimed, but commercially unsuccessful. The timing is terrible because he's in the middle of discovering that he actually enjoys writing romance and might want to continue exploring more hopeful themes in his work. The climax of the book involves both external plot resolution and internal character growth that feels completely earned. January's completion of her literary novel, which turns out to be hopeful despite dealing with difficult themes, represents her integration of cynicism and optimism into something more mature and nuanced. Gus's completion of his romance novel, which acknowledges relationship challenges while still working toward genuine happy endings, represents his willingness to hope despite past disappointments. Both characters have learned to write outside their comfort zones, not by abandoning their natural instincts but by expanding them. The scene where they read each other's completed books is one of the most romantic scenes I've encountered in contemporary fiction, because it's about intellectual and artistic intimacy as much as emotional connection. They're not just falling in love with each other, they're falling in love with each other's minds and creative spirits. The meta-commentary on genre and authenticity, what elevates Beach Read from excellent romance to genuine literary achievement, is Emily Henry's sophisticated commentary on storytelling, genre boundaries, and the relationship between art and life. Throughout January and Gus's journey, Henry is conducting a brilliant meta-analysis of how we categorize fiction and why those categories matter less than authentic emotional truth. The book's central argument is that the division between serious and popular fiction is artificial and counterproductive. Literary fiction isn't more honest because it focuses on suffering. It's just examining different aspects of human experience. Romance fiction isn't less realistic because it promises happy endings. It's exploring the human capacity for hope, growth, and connection. Henry shows us that the best stories, regardless of genre, combine emotional honesty with narrative satisfaction. January's literary fiction becomes powerful when she allows hope to coexist with pain. Gus's romance becomes meaningful when he acknowledges that happy endings require work and aren't guaranteed. Through their writing challenge, Henry demonstrates that expanding our storytelling range doesn't mean abandoning our strengths. It means integrating them with new perspectives and techniques. January doesn't stop being a romance writer when she learns to write literary fiction. She becomes a more complete writer who can bring literary depth to romantic storytelling. But perhaps most importantly, Beach Read argues that stories matter not because they accurately reflect reality, but because they help us imagine better possibilities. The best stories do both. They acknowledge life's complexities while still believing in human potential for growth, connection, and happiness. Critical analysis and contemporary relevance. Emily Henry's achievement with Beach Read extends far beyond creating an entertaining romance novel. She's written a book that functions simultaneously as genre fiction and genre commentary, as love story and literary criticism, as Beach Read and serious examination of what makes stories matter. The novel's exploration of grief is particularly sophisticated. January's process of mourning her father while reconciling her anger about his affair reflects genuine understanding of how complicated grief actually works. Henry doesn't offer easy resolution or simple forgiveness. She shows the ongoing work of learning to live with loss and betrayal while still maintaining capacity for love and hope. The book's treatment of depression and anxiety is equally nuanced. Both January and Gus deal with mental health challenges that affect their creativity and relationships, but Henry doesn't treat their depression as something that romantic love can cure. Instead, she shows how supportive partnership can provide stability and encouragement for the ongoing work of managing mental health. Henry's portrayal of the writing life is refreshingly honest about both the joys and challenges of creative careers. She shows the financial pressure, the imposter syndrome, the creative blocks, and the way external validation can become addictive. But she also shows the genuine satisfaction of artistic creation and the community that exists among writers despite professional competition. The book's success demonstrates that readers are hungry for romance that takes both the genre and its readers seriously. Beach Read doesn't condescend to romance fans or apologize for its optimism. It argues passionately for the value of stories that believe in love's possibility while acknowledging love's challenges. Conclusion and lasting impact. Beach Read succeeds because Emily Henry had the courage to write the book she wanted to read rather than the book she thought she should write. In an era when literary culture often forces writers to choose between commercial appeal and artistic credibility, Henry proved that the best art often comes from refusing that false choice. January and Gus's love story works because it's built on genuine compatibility, mutual respect, and shared values rather than just physical attraction or convenient circumstances. Their relationship develops through intellectual connection, creative collaboration, and emotional honesty, exactly the kind of foundation that makes happy endings believable and satisfying. But the book's lasting impact goes beyond its success as romance. Henry has written a love letter to storytelling itself, an argument for the value of all kinds of narratives, and a demonstration that genre boundaries serve marketing departments better than they serve either writers or readers. The novel's optimism feels radical in our current cultural moment. At a time when cynicism is often mistaken for sophistication and despair is considered more realistic than hope, Henry argues that believing in love, growth, and human potential actually requires more courage and intelligence than giving up. Beach Read proves that contemporary romance has evolved into something capable of serious artistic achievement while maintaining its commitment to emotional satisfaction and hopeful resolution. It's a beach read that's also a literary achievement, a love story that's also a manifesto, a fun summer novel that's also a profound meditation on what stories mean to us and why we need them. For writers, the book offers encouragement to expand beyond genre expectations while honoring what drew them to their chosen forms in the first place. For readers, it offers permission to love the books that bring them joy without apologizing for their preferences or feeling intellectually inferior. Most importantly, Beach Read reminds us that the best stories, whether romance, literary fiction, or anything in between, share a common goal, helping us understand ourselves and our world while imagining better possibilities for both. In January and Gus's journey from professional rivals to creative partners to genuine lovers, Henry shows us that the most meaningful connections happen when we stop defending our positions and start exploring each other's perspectives. That's what makes this book so special and why it continues to find new readers who discover in its pages both entertainment and enlightenment. Emily Henry has written a romance for people who love romance, a literary novel for people who love literary fiction, and a story for anyone who believes that love, both romantic and artistic, has the power to transform us into better versions of ourselves.